Hey guys, welcome to another video. Wanted to do a walkthrough of how I use the Iridium and how I dial in some of my favorite tones. If you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date, and make sure you stay tuned for part 2 of this video coming up, where we take a look at some of the stock cabs versus some third-party IRs as well. Let's dive right in. So let's go ahead and dive in. A couple things worth noting: I'm playing my Veritas Portlander Pro line. This one just has the stock Pro line pickups. I think they're based on the Bearcats that Veritas used to make. I've got El Reyos and another guitar, and these are actually so good that I haven't even worried about swapping these. Currently I'm on the Chime mode in the Iridium in stereo. Basically, when I'm looking at the Iridium, I'm kind of using it as my amp when I'm at home. And that's all I'm using it as. It sits after my effects, so nothing's after the Iridium. Everything, delay, verb, drive, is all hitting in front. And I'm basically trying to treat it as if it were a real amp like everyone else is. So when I'm recording at home, when I'm doing videos, that's what I'm running in stereo. As far as tone goes, what I look for from any amp, and I used to have an old 1994, I think it was, either a 93 or 94, one of the old British AC30s. Really loved that amp, so I kind of had a decent idea of what to look for as far as what a digital version of an AC30 sounds like. I've used the Kemper for 3 years and then played this. A friend of mine got this right when it came out. I played it for 30 minutes and listed the Kemper right after. It was that good. And that was with even just the stock IRs. We'll talk a little bit about how I think the Iridium stacks up against the other digital things like the Stomp and the Kemper and all of that in a bit. But I just want to talk about how I usually build tones, what I look for in a clean tone. So with everything off, this is where we're at right now. This is the RC booster off and the compressor off as well. Both of those are usually on. So this is just the Chime mode. I've got the drive set to about a little below 11 o'clock, bass is straight up. The middle knob, which is the cut knob, acts as a high cut knob on the AC30 mode. That's at around 9, 10 o'clock, and the treble is at 2. And this is the bridge pickup, everything wide open. Cool. So to me that sounds really good. It's not the most interesting thing in the world to play yet, but all of the AC30, the usual AC30 things are there, right? So a lot of good chime, a lot of top end. Let's go ahead and throw on my RC booster. The way that I use this, I kind of use this as my amp on my board, and I know that sounds redundant, but when I switch guitars, or if I'm going for a slightly different tone, which is maybe brighter or darker, I'll change things on that pedal, not on the Iridium. And then I've got compression. So again, let's listen to just kind of some clean chords, and then I'll kick on those two pedals, and that will be what I consider my clean tone. All right, and now let's click on, here's the booster and compression. So my goal with those two pedals, compression is really, I don't look for my compressor to like add a ton of character or anything like that. I just look for a decent squish, so get a little bit of sustain. And with the RC booster, I'm adding a little bit of the gain just to fill it out. If I strum really, really hard, it'll break up, and that's like, how a lot of people set it up. So here would be strumming really, really light. And then if you dig in, you can get a little bit more out of it. Even with that much compression, you can hear kind of the dynamic range with how clean or how dirty that can get. And I like the clean tone where the low end is still really, really stiff, but the mid-range and kind of the mid-range of the preamp section of the amp is really, really ready to go. So you can hear how exciting of a tone that is, for lack of a better word, but I still want that really, really stiff low end. So you can do this and get some natural compression. while the low end is still super stiff. So I can hit that as hard as I possibly can with the pick, and it's gonna stay really, really tight, really, really solid down low. That's the one thing I look out for low end. I want it to be full enough to where it's a nice full round tone, but it's not muddy or anything like that, and it doesn't start to flub out. So that's basically what I look for as far as like gain staging goes or anything like that. We'll take a look just at a couple drive tones. I know I've got my whole pedal board video as well. I'll try to throw that up right above here. We'll look at just one of my, or a couple of my wet effects settings too, to kind of show how those fill out and what I look for those two. So here's my Superbolt. That's the first in chain drive. This one's set a little brighter, a little less gain. The gain is a little below 9 o'clock, and the tone and volume are straight up. So here's clean. And here's the Superbolt. So it kind of does that really, really nice kind of light drive. And that was me playing aggressive too. So I can set this anywhere from kind of a bit of grit like we just heard there, or I can roll back the tone or the volume on my guitar, and it can be kind of like a super loud clean. But that one's meant to be brighter, a bit more open. Here is the Benson, the preamp. This one's going to be darker and a bit more drive. So that one's been great. My thing with drive is as you add more gain, you kind of get that like fizzy, trebly thing going on. So with that being my more mid-rangey, more aggressive drive, I try to roll off a decent amount of highs while keeping it still super present. So those are the two drives, and then I've got a boost. This is just the boost from Vertex. I really like using this. It's after both drives, so I don't do the whole boost in front. I think that's a really cool tone, but the way that I work, I've got enough grit on the front end to where I don't need to be making more of that, if that makes sense. I rarely stack the two drives. I'll usually just pair each one with the boost if I need more of it. So here's the boost, or here's clean, and then I'll kick the boost on. Here's the boost. So again, it's my exact tone, just turned up a little bit. So the heaviest tone I would really have would be the Benson, and the boost, which would be this. So again, right now for the things that I play and the songs that we play, I don't really need anything more than that. I think if you start stacking too many drives, you kind of lose the character of each one and it flubs out a bit. So let's add in a little bit of reverb just to take a look at what those would sound like with some wet effects. This is my Bethel setting for both the Timeline and Big Sky, and y'all can check that out in the description too. So we'll take a look at how I would set up each of these pedals and how they sound kind of in a mix. So this would be clean. So again, that's just clean with those Bethel settings. Here is the Superbolt, going to be a little grittier. And then here's the Benson. This isn't the kind of part I'd usually play. with the Benson, since it's a bit more aggressive, but just for the sake of comparison, we'll play that same part. So for things like a mixed tone, like what is a good mixed tone, people will say like push the mids or cut lows or all of that. I really just try to give either front of house or whether it's the front of my interface, I try to give as much tone as I can. So I actually try to aim for a somewhat flat frequency response. So I don't want too much highs, I don't want too many mids or too much bass either. And so playing something that's a little flat to start with might actually feel a little dead or a little uninteresting to play, but that's when you can really start crafting kind of what your EQ, what you want that to feel like, as well as sound like. And if you need to make adjustments on the back end too, then having that flat EQ gives you a really, really strong bass to start with. So as far as good mixed tone, I always say, and just give like a really, really loud clean tone, a really full clean tone, and everything will kind of come together from there. If you start out with pushing too many mids or you crank the highs to try and get in the mix, you'll get turned down actually. So far we've been on the Chime setting, the Vox. And so what I want to do, I use that probably 80% of the time, and then the other 20% I'll use the round setting. So I want to kind of compare the two sounds that I've got going on with those two amps. So let's turn the wet effects back off. This is just the compression and RC booster on the Vox setting. And then we'll jump over to the Fender. So definitely different. It lives kind of in a different EQ space. It's a bit rounder, definitely more in the lows and the low mids as well. One thing that I would definitely say about the round mode is that it needs a good amount of drive on the Iridium. If I was to put the drive where I had it on the Chime setting, put that in the exact same spot on the round, this is what that would sound like. Which doesn't sound bad. It's not inherently bad. It just doesn't have the size I'm looking for. So Fenders naturally have a good bit more headroom and they're a bit stiffer in the low end. So let's move that now to about 1 o'clock, which is where I've got this preset saved. And now it wakes up a bit more. And again, you're kind of hearing that flat EQ that I was talking about. I'm not trying to have this be like super bright or anything like that. And I don't really pay attention a ton or care where the knobs are set. This round mode is pretty dark and pretty mid-rangey to start. So the way I have the knobs on the Iridium, actually bass is straight up. The drive is at 1 o'clock. The mid knob, which is an actual mid-range on the Fender, that's pulled back to about 10:30, and the treble is up at about 2:30. So what I'm trying to do with that mid-range and the treble is just open it up a bit. If you add or keep the mids at noon and bring the treble back to noon, it just gets a little stuffy, so I'm just trying to open up that mid-range. That's basically what it sounds like. I'm not trying to get the Vox and the Fender to sound exactly the same, but I do want them to feel familiar. So I don't want the Vox to be super driven and then the Fender like super clean. I want to be able to switch back and forth. So when I'm cutting on like a project or something like that, I'll usually track one guitar with the Vox, and then I can switch over to the Fender right away. And I use the favorite switch to kind of save that Fender sound, so it's just right there. I want to talk a little bit about how I think the Iridium stacks up against the Kemper. Like I said, I had the Kemper for about 3 years and then sold it within an hour of playing this. The Kemper's really cool and gets some points as far as variety goes. I'm sure you can have 4,000 profiles like I did, and kind of get the option paralysis of not knowing which one to pick, which I ran into a lot. The thing about the Kemper that I don't love is that there is this weird headroom thing that it doesn't quite have, even with like the 2 or 3 headroom hacks that you can run. It just never quite has the headroom like an amp would. So I would put on a drive, and it does this weird kind of high-end fizzy thing no matter how much you try to bring back the volume to unity volume, or try to bring the gain back to where it's not that much. So Kemper is great at giving you a tone at a certain snapshot of an amp. I don't think it's wonderful at moving outside of that snapshot. So the Iridium is really, really cool because it gives you those 3 options. Again, Kemper, props to them. You can have thousands of options, but all of those options kind of are derivatives of the 3 amps that are in the Iridium. So I would rather have 3 really good versions of those 3 main amps than thousands of okay versions of those amps. A big point to the Iridium too is it takes pedals really well. If you're a pedal board guy like me, like with the Kemper, I was never an all-in kind of Kemper stage or Kemper, the little pedal board they have. I was never on that train. So I had always had my pedal board and had to get it in stereo, I had to do the whole 4 cable method, which is just a nightmare. When you're trying to record with that, you wind up running like 7 cables, which is just a ton. So the Iridium makes it super easy to set up. I have 1 cable for input that goes in. That's just the TRS stereo end into the input. And I've got 2 cables that come out, and that's it. So super easy, and it's actual stereo. Even though the Iridium doesn't have the true left-right, you can't set 2 different amps. You can kind of get away with it by setting maybe a more American-style speaker and mic combination on the left or the right, and then a more British, maybe like a blue or a silver or a greenback speaker on the opposite side to kind of get that. That's what I usually do to just kind of cheat and get away with that combination. I do give props to the HX Stomp. They've kind of been killing it at the dual amp thing. They're one of the only ones that offers that capability. I would love for Strymon to have done that. If you can fit a favorite switch on here, then they could have definitely been able to fit another amp side as well. As far as price point, I think the Iridium just crushes it. It's $400 for the easiest, in my opinion, easiest barrier to entry kind of learning curve direct solution out there. The Stomp is great, and I know a lot of people have made some awesome presets for that. As far as the actual tone, I would actually go probably Iridium on that. The Kemper's kind of cool too as far as the tones you can get, but at the end of the day, to me, after playing the Iridium, the Kemper stuff sounds a little bit like plastic, or just not quite there. It sounds like a Kemper, right? Like you might get some really cool, almost perfect sounds, but amps don't sound perfect. They have, that's what makes them real. They kind of have all those imperfections, and guitar players actually really, really like that. But having played old amps and getting to A/B them, with my actual Fender in my left ear and then the Iridium in my right, I would definitely say the Iridium comes closest to real amp tones. Hey guys, that's all I've got for us today. Make sure you leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and comment below if you've got questions or anything like that. We've also got part 2 of this video coming up, where we take a look at some stock cabs versus some third-party IRs from David Hislop. Definitely want to check that out. We'll see you next time.